Your Holiness, if I may start. Yes. While other speakers are coming, there are still 5 minutes until the beginning. Yeah. I would like to say a few words of introduction, why we were so interested in coming to this discussion, and thank you very much for your kind invitation. We feel that Russia and Russian science can be an important bridge between the Eastern tradition of thinking and science and Western science. Russia occupies a peculiar place, both culturally and geographically. It is, on one side, is filled with Eastern mentality, and a particular harsh environment which required cooperation of people in this environment for their survival. On the other type, it accumulated the Western influences from Western Europe and also rigorous scientific traditions which arose in Western Europe several centuries ago. And that forms a very specific amalgam, mixture of these two cultures and thinkings, which I might call Middle West because it is in between these two cultures. And if to take it as a clue, it can actually serve a very useful role because of several centuries of these contacts between these different cultures and approaches, both contemplative and experimental scientific approaches. People in Russia might have a better readiness and understanding to bridge these two cultures, and especially in the fields of deep questions of humanity, which are not solved yet by the Western science. So that was our initial motive to come on your kind invitation and to participate in this discussion with the topic of the nature of consciousness as one of the most important for the humanity, both in understanding ourselves and in relieving many sufferings in the world.
Yes, that's right.
And also because of the deep interest of the Russian science for nearly 2 centuries in this question. So people here are coming from different disciplines and different traditions, different scientific schools. For example, Professor Tatiana Chernigovskaya, she is a professor of the St. Petersburg University, formerly Leningrad University. And she is a specialist in cognitive science, especially in the problem of brain and language, and also language and mind, language and consciousness. She has numerous research publications in these fields, and she is also very well known in Russia for promoting understanding of science of brain and mind to general public. Professor David Israelovich Dubrovsky is a philosopher. He is working in Moscow at the Institute of Philosophy of the Russian Academy of Sciences. And he is an outstanding expert in the field of philosophy of consciousness. He suggested as early as in 1960s a genuinely new theory of consciousness, which relates consciousness to information in the brain. And his main interest is linking the consciousness to the brain studies. He also has hundreds of publications, several books which are classics in Russian philosophy of consciousness. Professor Victoria Lysenko, she is also at the Institute of Philosophy in Moscow, and she is an expert in the Eastern philosophy and especially in the Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist science. She is a head of the sector on these topics in the Institute of Philosophy. And recently, a year ago, she has organized a first meeting in Moscow where the Buddhist scholars and Russian philosophers and scientists met to discuss these issues of mind and consciousness. You know Dr. Andrei Terentiev, who has been long acquainted and a friend of you and translated many of your books into Russian, being an expert in Buddhism. Professor Nikolai Yankovsky is a scientific director of the Institute of General Genetics. He is a geneticist broadly, and he is interested in many areas of genetics, having a lot of fundamental work in this field. And he works also on the genetics of different populations. Professor Maria Falikman, she is at Moscow State University. She is a psychologist by training, but she works in the field which combines psychology and neuroscience. She is interested in various aspects of attention, memory, and how humans can perform these complex cognitive functions. Professor Dmitry Volkov is again a philosopher. He is also a specialist in the philosophy of consciousness. He has founded and supports the work of the Center for Consciousness Studies at Moscow State University. And he is famous in our country because he also invited many of the outstanding Western philosophers of neuroscience and consciousness to visit our country and organized a number of international meetings on the problem of philosophy of consciousness. And Professor Yuri Alexandrov, he is the head of the laboratory at the Institute of Psychology, also Russian Academy of Sciences in Moscow. And he combines expertise in neurophysiology, neuroscience, and psychology. He actually is the head of the laboratory which is called the Neural Basis of Mind. And this shows some traditions of the interest of Russian neuroscience and psychology to the problem of mind and brain in scientific research. And I myself as a neuroscientist by training, but also work in the field of neuroscience of memory, mind, and higher nervous activity. So these are the participants, and we're very thankful for inviting us to meet you for this important discussion. Yep. So, if you have no questions to participants, we expected that you might give us some introduction to the way you think about this problem and what you think is important in this context.
Interest towards technology from my childhood. I have very much interest about the mechanic things, how it moves, these things. So then gradually develop interest towards science. So over 30 years, serious discussion with scientists, mainly, as I mentioned briefly yesterday also, the cosmology, neurobiology, physics, particularly quantum physics, then psychology. So then time passes. Now I feel this kind of meeting, two purpose. One purpose, simply extend our knowledge through scientific research. Previously, as far as I know, till late 20th century, the scientists mainly, you see, carry investigation about external things, including brain. But just, you see, mainly, I think a thing which can, measured, and also third person, you see, can join all like that. The consciousness very much sort of related with a subjective way, like that. But then later part, 20th century, and now beginning of 21st century, now more and more scientists, they begin to feel, there is something which affects our brain. So that's still, that very nature or sort of system still mysterious. But there is something. Kasa, levitate kasa, blah kasa. Oh, through meditation, through training of mind, is the effect that kasa. That word I difficult to pronounce.
Brain plasticity. Brain plasticity.
Oh. So then obviously, now scientists say, many scientists say, the constant anger, fear, stress, very bad for our health. Calm mind, very important for our health. So now that's so one purpose, this kind of meeting, expand the field of scientific research. Now, not only external thing, but also you see, should include our consciousness, our emotion, our mind. This one purpose, purely academic, science. Of course, decade by decade, even I think year by year, scientific research further developing. So now should include about mind or emotion, these things. One thing. The second purpose, now look, this very moment, we enjoy peace, friendship, but at the same time, this very moment, some part of the world killing. Human being, killing by human being. Some human being killed by animal, tiger, lion, elephant. Sometimes, it becomes news. Now human being killing by another human being, more or less normal. And then there is huge gap, rich and poor. Richer people, richer nation, they enjoy a lot of facility. And also they have, because of surplus somewhere, surplus. At the same time, same planet, same human being, facing starvation. Particularly those young children. Yemen, some other places, we can see often television. Young boy, young children, very thin, dying due to lack of medication and also due to lack of kasadi, protein, like that. So, and then mobilized violence, that's war. Then 20th century, you see, through war, including civil war in Russia and also China, and so on, including civil war in 20th century, some historians say over 200 million people killed through violence. If that amount of immense violence really sort of make new shape of world, and then some people say worthwhile to sacrifice millions of people's life in order to bring better world, peaceful world. But that is not the case. Now today, still in human mind, still you see thinking, whenever some problem, disagreement happen, always you think how to solve that by force. That's old thinking. We should learn now to use force. What happened? Really solve the problem? No. Violence, once you committed violence, more violence, chain reaction, like that. One example, I love President Bush, one of former US president. As a human being, very nice person. I love him. I respect him. But his Iraq war, his motivation is good. Try to bring democracy, freedom in Iraq. But method wrong. Once he committed violence, then unexpected sort of side effect. Now today's world, in Arab, many Muslim world, you see the negative feeling towards America. So after that event happened, since I know President Bush very well, so one occasion, my meeting with President Bush, then I told him, I respect you, I love you, but some of your policy is concerned, I have some great reservation. And he laughed. So like that. You see, motivation, I'm quite sure, sincere, but method wrong. Use violence. So nowadays, I think, anti-American feeling in Arab world. Some of my friends in Muslim world, they're telling me like that. Since Iraq war, much sort of was the effect. So therefore, now I always telling with full confidence, now 20th century becomes century of violence. Now on the basis of our experience, which we learned from events in 20th century, now we must build this 21st century should be century of peace. In order to solve disagreement, some problem, we must use dialogue, talk. Consider them as human brothers, sisters, part of humanity. Whether we like it or not, we have to live together on this planet. With sort of scientific sort of help of scientific sort of research and then technology, some disagreement happen, then the other party should remove to Mars or Moon. Let them remain there. We free, then no problem. That's impossible. We have to live on this planet.
Together,
Added due to global warming and global economy. National boundary, not much significant. We have to live together. So now time come. We have to educate. We have to change through education, through awareness, the concept of we and they. That you see, we have to change. You see, that strong feeling, we and they. That's the basis of violence. So we should make effort, you see, to educate people. Although you see some differences there, political or economy or religiously, but still we are part of humanity. So my commitment is trying to promote sense of oneness of 7 billion human beings. Now here, they're very much involved. Sense of love, sense of concern over others' well-being. That quite fit we human beings, social animal. And also then one important, now a few years ago, one occasion of meeting with scientists. Some scientists, they say, now actually one cartoon, there's one cartoon, 2 children play together with smile. That cartoon show one about 6-month-old infant child, child, language not yet developed. When you see the child seeing the cartoon, 2 children play together with smile, the infant child also smiling. I saw. I also participate at that meeting. And then another cartoon, two children, you see, a negative attitude one another. So when that cartoon show to the infant child, and then more important, constant anger, actually eating our immune system. Other hand, more compassionate mind, the immune system remain and sometimes even increase. So nowadays, see, the way to promote human love, human compassion, if we rely on religion, then today's 7 billion human beings, over 1 billion non-believer. Among the 6 billion believer also, sometimes you see quite strange believer. Even you see their belief, you see, causing more division, more anger. So therefore, now there is no other sort of way, other alternative, except through scientific way to educate people. Warm-heartedness is very important. Not relying on religion, not talking about next life or heaven. Simply, we have to live together on this planet. Then live together, there's no other way, but with full of suspicion, anger. No use. So, there's no other choice. We have to live together with friendly, with trust, much happier. So through education, entirely based on scientific finding. So already I have some sort of scientific evidence, evidence, more compassionate mind. Firstly, individual have much benefit, then family level, then community level, then national level, eventually international level. So that is another purpose of such meeting, to make clear peace of mind through scientific way, scientific research. You see, tell people, peace of mind. Peace of mind is very important. How to bring peace? Through anger, impossible. Through jealousy, impossible. Through suspicion, impossible. Only through trust. Trust entirely based on compassion, love, like that. So that's my main motivation. Dealing with scientists and try to seek sort of scientific evidence, peace of mind, compassionate mind is very important. I think religious field, I think nearly 3,000 years, we always repeat love, 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 love. The effect limited. So the scientific sort of finding brings confidence easily. That's all. Then now here, Russia, as you rightly mentioned, geographically bridge east and west. Then Russia, the huge land and the natural resources, I think still great natural resources. The world generally, for example, the crisis of water now coming. But Russia, I think big future. So, and then another factor, Russia formally accepted Buddhism is one of the religion. Russian Christian Orthodox, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, and then Russian Federation, there are, I think at least Tuva, Buryat, Kalmykia, these three republics, traditionally Buddhist community. So in the past, really authentic, wonderful scholars from this area. When I was young in Tibet, when I carried study, there are at least a few hundred scholars from this area, including Mongolia. Very top sort of was the philosopher. So traditionally, you see, from this area, they really produce, I think, wonderful scholars as well as practitioners. The Russian Revolution destroyed these things. So it is your moral responsibility to repay. So, and politically, if may I say so, after Second World War, during Cold War, Berlin Wall, these, a little bit, you see, they psychologically, emotionally, a little bit distance, Western world and Russia. My first visit, then Soviet Union, I felt, oh, Russian people, emotionally, some kind of negative attitude towards West. If Russia not prepare well, including nuclear weapon, West going to attack. That kind of mentality is totally wrong. My visit Soviet Union, 1979. 73, I visited Western Europe. Just opposite. Their side, fear. Oh, the Warsaw Pact, and East Berlin. May create some problem. When I visit Soviet Union, just opposite. So this, I think, due to lack of contact, personal contact, people's level, government sometimes manipulate. So therefore, now Russian people, great nation. Now time come, more sort of research work, the scientific sort of research work, and eventually more contact with Western scientists. I found among the scientists there is a real spirit of internationalism. They don't care what nation, come from what nation. Like I think doctor, hospital, any patient when come to the hospital authority never asks, what is your religion? What is your nationality? They never ask. Consider as a human patients. Take care. So we have that kind of sort of kasota practice of that kind of kasota. That process. It's that kind of habit there. Now time come, we must expand, including one sort of scientist group. Also, you see, can expand that. So these are my sort of my view. So I'm quite sure this not just once meeting, but we should start from now more constant sort of meeting. Whenever I have some sort of meeting with Western scientists, the Russian scientists, I think should participate, should come and make friendship like that. Okay. Now questions, or of course presentation, each scientist according to their own field. Okay.
Мгм.
And then some questions.
Может быть, мы поменяемся тогда? А мне, наверное, удобнее просто глядеть на его святейшество.
So I was supposed to guide the session, and of course Professor Nochin doesn't need any presentation because all of us know who he is. He's a leading neuroscientist and internationally acknowledged. By the way, all of us are involved in international science. We are not locked within the country. That doesn't mean that all the scholars are like that, but the majority of those with whom we are connected at home are internationally functioning. And of course, all of us who are here are of this group. So Konstantin Anokhin, he is working for the Moscow State University and Cognitive Department of Kurchatov Institute. He's a neurophysiologist, but he long ago got a fundamental interest in the problem of mind, not only brain, but mind, in connection with memory and genetics. So it's my pleasure to give floor to Professor Anokhin. All of us are friends, not only colleagues, so we are closely interconnected. And I hope that we can present not only our fields, our professional fields, but the place of Russian view and Russian approach to science. I do not hint on the fact that we have some very specific approach, but still there are differences in instrumental and more precise, I would say even more technical approach of Western science, because Western science is the science of the third person. It measures everything, it gathers everything, and organizes everything, while our approach is much more holistic, I would say. Several of the presenters will show it. So you're most welcome.
Thank you very much. Could we probably change the places so that I can see His Holiness and...
That's up to you.
Thank you.
As you mentioned, Russian scientists are more holistic. So now let me see whether you holistic way or not.
So it's a privilege to us to try to persuade you.
Your Holiness,
Oh.
I would like to try to prove this, but probably contrary to some of the expectations of Buddhist science, because holism in Russian science also means unity of brain and mind, and this is a long-standing tradition of the research. So I will start with what I think are three specific features of Russian neuroscience. The first one is that it has focused on the problem of mind from the very beginning of experimental neuroscience, more than 150 years ago. You mentioned in your introduction that the interest to mind as a subject of neuroscience is mainly late 20th century, but it is for majority of the Western science. In Russian neuroscience, It has been for more than 150 years. And it was misunderstood in many cases by the Western neuroscientists and neglected. But this was the case. Now, second, that in approaching to the mind-body problem, Russian neuroscience was first unitary and second materialistic. That meant that most of the schools of Russian neuroscience treated mind and brain as two different aspects of the same ultimate reality. And this reality...
Yes, go on.
It treated as material in its origin and nature. However, I have to stress and make an important note that materialistic understanding of mind in Russian neuroscience is very much different from the classical materialism or physicalism as it is understood in the Western science and philosophy. And I may add, and that was my starting comment, that probably not only in the Western science and philosophy, but also in the Buddhist science and philosophy. If to make very superficial statement of the difference, in the 20th century, Russian neuroscience developed understanding of the brain and mind as a single material entity more in the traditions of dialectical philosophy and much influenced by Marxism coming to Russia in the 20th century. And this is very important to understand that when we speak materialism in the West, and probably in the understanding of the Buddhist philosophy, and materialism as it was understood in the 20th century in respect to mind and brain in Russia, these are two different meanings. I will...
그렇죠. materialism 고발렌다의 카드 시에서.
I think from the Buddhist viewpoint, mind, there are different levels,
yeah.
or grosser level of mind. Do you consider eye consciousness also mind? The sensorial mind or consciousness entirely depend on connected with brain. Some part of brain damage. There's some sense of organs cannot function properly. So then, dream time, another level. Sensorial consciousness no longer. Then mental level. There are now scientists also now judging the wave of brain. They can predict now this person not dreaming, this person not dreaming. So still related with brain. Then usually we call unconscious, faint. Still another level of consciousness. If consciousness completely stops, then the later as a way, another consciousness cannot develop, because consciousness also, you see, all these things goes law of causality, cause, effect, cause, effect, cause, effect. The cause, the substantial cause. So matters, the substantial cause must be matter. Consciousness, you see, cannot become substantial cause of matter. Matter, substantial cause must be matter. So similarly, consciousness, substantial cause must be consciousness. So now that level, very, very subtle level, then more or less independent from this brain. The brain function stop. But still, body sometimes remain very fresh. Next 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So more very, very subtle level consciousness still in the body. But the brain stop now.
I think you very well summarized the difference between the position of neuroscience in general and Russian neuroscience and the knowledge accumulated in Buddhist science of mind and philosophy. The neuroscience, including Russian neuroscience, sees no miracle in the transition from the causality of the superficial levels of mind and consciousness to a deeper mind. That means that all levels of mind should have some natural explanation. They should be not abrupt change from the one which is supported by the material systems to the immaterial causes and systems. And in Russian neuroscience, the dialectical approach, emergent materialism as it was later called in the Western philosophy, suggests that the consciousness causality, there is a conscious causality, but it is a high level causality acquired by the certain stages of the evolution of this life and sentient beings. So this is the difference which we probably need to discuss. The third specific feature of Russian neuroscience is tradition of scientific schools in exploring deep questions. This is very peculiar feature of Russian science. It means that when an important questions in philosophy, in mind, in physics are addressed, there are certain continuity of several generations of scientists, probably hundreds of scientists, working along the same kind of approach, theory to develop it deeper and to understand it better, which makes first a negative probably component. There is a lot of inertia in such approach. But on other side, you need sometimes, especially in deep questions, to have consecutive generations of scientists bringing new approaches to the same problem and tradition to accumulate this knowledge. So I will now expand on each of these features. Focus on mind from the very beginning of scientific studies of the brain. It started in the middle of the 19th century when experimental neuroscience appeared. And there was a famous Russian neuroscientist who is not well known in the West, but he was at the origins of the modern neuroscience. He was experimental neuroscientist, and he made two great discoveries in experimental field. First, he discovered that the brain, central nervous system, can have not only excitatory action on the body, on the processes in the body, but it can inhibit some of the processes. So if you stimulate parts of the brain, he found, it can stop some of the processes in the body, not only excite. It was called central inhibition. Another very important discovery, you mentioned several times that there is a field of neuroplasticity, which is very recent development. Now, it is not the case. Actually, the studies of neural plasticity were very active at the beginning of the 20th century, and the term comes from here. But experimentally, the phenomenon of neural plasticity was shown first also by Sechenov. He showed that when you stimulate the nervous system with a weak stimulus, which produces no response, it seems that there is nothing going on in the nervous system. But if you then, sometime after, stimulate with the same type of a weak stimuli for the second time, there is a response from the nervous system. So there is...
가서 당구도 지어봤어.
네, 근데 록슈도 친구시대는 남산 소리에 명했지. 근데 양자 제베이나 응아메 슈디 소리 여바지 니버되게 대치용 그랬어요. 뭐 용도 해지.
So the brain can accumulate some influences, some processes, and store them to sum up. So he discovered the effect of neural summation, and he immediately noticed that this experimental effect, is of a key importance for the study of learning and plasticity and memory. But as many of Russian neuroscientists, due to the cultural traditions, he was genuinely interested in the problem of mind and believed that it is neuroscience that has to get into understanding of mind, and this has to be a subject, the main subject of neuroscience. So in 1863, he wrote an essay, a book, which was called at that time an attempt to introduce physiological foundations into mental processes. It was so unusual and revolutionary at that time that this title was banned by censors. It was not allowed to publish this book with such radical statement. So it was published with a more modest title, Reflexes of the Brain. But the main idea was this.
Foundations.
No, the 가장 뒤집어 그런죠. 대 망고치기 로를 만들어 버치신 디쇼지. 하장 가져라. 단위 조단한테 하장 그 대화도 시던 거에서 physical foundations of mental processes. 그렇죠. 류 내담 셈기 돈에 들어야 돼.
그래서 수월에 파래 셈기 류기 나단 되어서 그래 류기 나단
이 가장 재밌게 하신 reflexes of the brain sage.
There was a lot of public discussions around his book, and many of people were inspired by this. Many were surprised, so he participated in a discussion. His next work, Who and How Should Develop Psychology, was also claiming that to understand psychology, we need neuroscience, but not just the first-person experience.
Psychology di 가서 그 야부고 쳐발라 레제도 단디 야부고 쳐고 요시 그런 소리신 메딘로 쇼인서 데 시간 좀 버려서
더 강사시라고 소소히 냠용 점으로 땜고 실론이 시트라서 가 레벨 6월 때네 시트라서
And another great Russian neuroscientist who was experimental neuroscientist was Vladimir Mikhailovich Bekhterev. He started with neuroanatomy. He was actually one of the best experts in the anatomy of the nervous system. As it's shown in the figures, he made the first three-dimensional picture of what is now known connectome, the connections between the different areas of the nervous system. But he was also deeply interested in neuroscience of mind. And he called his approach objective psychology or psychoreflexology. And he also was holding the unitary approach to the mind and brain. Perhaps the most known of Russian neuroscientists in the West is Ivan Petrovich Pavlov. He was physiologist and he got his Nobel Prize in physiology of digestion. But he was genuinely interested in understanding how brain is related to mind, or how brain gives birth to consciousness, as he formulated it. So he started his long-term project on understanding the conditioned reflexes as mental units of mental activity. And this became known as the physiology of higher nervous activity. It was grossly misunderstood in the Western science, because even in the translations of his work into English, the translators removed some of his introductory and conclusions, where he said that this study is important to understand the mind and consciousness, because they were afraid that his interest in mind will damage the reputation of his scientific studies as academic scientist. So, speaking about the second point, unitary materialistic approach to the mind-brain problem, he was a strict materialist in this. And his colleague in England, in United Kingdom, also the Nobel Prize laureate, Sir Charles Sherrington, told Pavlov on the occasion of Pavlov's visit to Royal Society in London that I don't think that your conditioned reflexes will have a success in England. They smell too materialistic. Pavlov, in response,
too materialistic.
No, too materialistic.
This is all chorus.
Russia.
England ki kebati che.
What?
Gonda yuencho ki kebati England ki kebati che. Ye cho de uruso kebati. Di sonza danda di dinalia di sungye di inji ki kebati ki uruso kebati ya tuspa samzu shebati tusre.
They smell too materialistic. Kasudati. Zero. Okay.
In response, Pavlov, reacting to the views of Sherrington about mind and brain, wrote in a letter to my grandfather, who suggested to translate a book of Sherrington, Mechanisms of the Brain. He wrote in this letter, I don't think that there is a need to translate his book. It contains nearly nothing new except a ridiculous extravagance that our mind might have no relation to our brain. To our brain is here. So this is about the materialism. Now about tradition of scientific schools. I mentioned at the previous slide that this phrase of Pavlov was in a letter to my grandfather. This is because my grandfather was a pupil, disciple of Pavlov, and I has followed the route of studying the same questions as my grandfather. And actually my son recently defended a PhD, and he is also a neuroscientist. And my mother, who was the daughter of my grandfather, she is also a neuroscientist. So it comes already 4 generations, and my grandfather was a student of Pavlov and Bekhterev. And that takes a long tradition of approaching the same questions. I was interested in neuroscience mainly because my grandfather presented me his book when I was 16 with the words that I should understand it in next 6 years. And I tried a lot because I loved him greatly. And I didn't understand it in 10 years, in 15 years. Only about 20 years of efforts, I started to think that I understand something. And this accumulates a lot of efforts. So now speaking about the difference in materialistic approaches in Russian neuroscience, there were 2 stages, 2 periods in Russian neuroscience of mind. One was when the Russian neuroscience, like Sechenov or initially Pavlov, were trying to reduce the mind to the matter of the brain in the classical traditions of materialism, in a reductionist science. So the very first title of Sechenov paper was actually the attempt to reduce the mind to the physiological processes. But later on, with the development of Marxism in Russia and interests of the new features of Marxism like dialectical materialism, there was a younger generation of scientists, both in neuroscience and psychology. Some of us will speak later on about Vygotsky school and Luria school, which came from psychology and influenced by Marxism, historical and dialectical materialism. They start to develop a new approach, which was also materialistic, but different from the classical materialism and physicalism. We can call it, I can call it, a kind of a middle level or middle way approach, which in Russian neuroscience was called a systems neuroscience or systems physiology. And it was directly applicable to the problems of mind. So my grandfather was from the very beginning interested in understanding the brain working as an organ of mind. And he wrote in 26 a paper which was called Dialectical Materialism and the Problems of Mind, which was a kind of a conflict with his teacher, Pavlov, who was more mechanistically oriented. And he was against applying the dialectical principles to the study of mind. So,
dialectical system karusa gore.
Can you explain this dialectical process, dialectical materialism?
The dialectical materialism, there are great experts in this field, so I would hesitate to tell much, but it says that there is a continuous evolution and development of matter, and it passes through different levels, and each level gets a fundamentally new principles which are never existent in the previous levels. So life contains, with life there are new things appearing like problems for the organisms or motives, emotions, With the mental life, there is a consciousness. And each new level is fundamental in terms that you cannot reduce it to the down level. You have to have the certain language, and there is a certain causality at this level. So the living organisms have the causes which are unique for the living organisms. The sentient living organisms with mind and consciousness have causes which are conscious causes, mental causes. They are not simply physical.
그래서
Is it like evolution?
It is the evolution of matter. It tells that in the universe, sometimes there were no stars, there were no galaxies, they appeared. There was no life, it appeared and emerged. And in living organisms, there was no nervous system initially, and there was no mental activity. But each new level, which is important, it is just not the broad on top of each one. It reorganizes, changes all the levels down. So they evolve together. It is not that mind evolved over the brain. From the very beginning of the nervous system and life, the nervous system was changing itself to have the mind in it.
나가도 10월 통화ሻ인 거다. 10월 통화샤이었다. 또 저걸 왔다고. 단 10년 년에 다 갈래 누구 전에. 이 뒤처지기 10회 된 전에 이 10사 되듯이. 가. 또 술도 드셔로. 동아 동배소스 난게 뒤에서는 뭐 자되지.
I will skip several next slides to come to more important things. This just describes various experimental approaches which were behind the theory of this middle level organization, systems organization. What is important about this idea, what happens in the organism, starting from the beginning of life, but also then in the nervous system, is that each organism consists of many elements. But when it faces different problems in the life and the environment, not all elements are active together. There are some selective sets of elements which cooperate together. And the idea of cooperation of these elements at the biochemical level in the unicellular organisms or in multicellular organisms in the brain, cooperation of elements towards achieving some useful result for the whole organism is the idea of functional system, which was developed in Russian neuroscience. I will skip some of the findings there and we'll move to the present state. We are today at the level of extended functional systems theory, and I would like to state the purposes of what we're aiming at. That despite huge progress in neuroscience, the problem of mind remains with us. It is still not solved. And the crucial question is still the same as Pavlov posed at the beginning of his study. How does the matter of brain gives birth to subjective experience? I will call this question as the main question, meaning main as a mind and brain question, to stress the great importance of this problem to our self-understanding and well-being, and also to set an objective to find a scientific answer to this problem. And we think that there is a time today to be focusing of neuroscience on this main question, which we will call main project. And I will make just one comment about this project in which we are doing things at the neuroscience level, cellular level, molecular level, studying the mind in the nervous system. What I think we need is that not any amount of experiments, not a single crucial experiment will make us understand this. What we need is a bold fundamental theory of mind and brain. Without this, there will be no significant progress. And to build such theory, we will need a specific methodology. And in relating this methodology to the issues of Buddhist science of mind, I would like to draw the analogy with the methodology of science in physics. Albert Einstein, a few years before his death, in a letter to his long-standing friend Maurice Sullivan, sketched this picture, which is his understanding of how the science is done in physics. Below is the level of experience of our senses. It is called E. What it shows that from many examples of our experience, through the process which he called intuition, free invention, there is a theory built which is named by A, the circle on the top. These are fundamental axioms of the theory, the fundamental principles. From these fundamental principles, some exact statements, the consequences, are deduced. And they then go back to our experience. First, there are three lines there. First, they go to the experience which we already have because they give some understanding of our existing experience. They give some explanations to our knowledge. Second, they go to the places where they predict something which we have not seen yet before. It is only theory can suggest it, that we should look there and test this theory by these bold predictions.
Can you simplify that and explain that again?
Mm-hmm. What Einstein meant is that when you have a fundamental theory, it is not derived from any single fact. It comes from a great amount of facts.
Yes.
And it makes very bold statements. The few fundamental principles, there might be 2 or 3, but they are very general. Then from these fundamental principles, you can get the consequences, which are laws. He'll name them as laws. And these laws suggest you what you should experience, what you should expect from the world if it is organized according to this theory. So they give you some explanations of what is really behind these. So it gives you some picture of physical reality, for example, in physics, how it is really built, though it is not invisible to our senses. It gives you also predictions to be tested, like the theory of relativity predicted some very unusual things. And they were then deliberately, intentionally tested by scientists. Without theory, they wouldn't imagine that it is necessary to look in these places. And the third arrow is also very important. It tells that the theory can promote the science far, far away. For example, it predicts something for which we do not have any methods. So it suggests that we need to develop these new techniques, new approaches. It may take many years sometime in order to be tested. For example, the theory of relativity, the gravitational aspects of the theory of relativity, was tested only 100 years after the development of the theory of relativity by Einstein. It is a long, long period which was driven by theory. So,
Charles.
So
that's yes.
This is the way how Albert Einstein saw the epistemology of physical science. I would like to slightly extend his scheme in order to incorporate in it also mind and brain science. I think what we need in mind and brain science, in main science, is that besides the experience from the third person perspective, we have also the experience from the first person perspective. I will call it mind 1 and mind 3. So historically, how the mind was started initially was through this top level, from mind 1 or first person perspective. And only later it came to observations of human behavior and scientific psychology as human verbal reports, which is a third person perspective. And only later again, neuroscience, the brain sciences, also from the third person perspective, came to this study. What I'm suggesting is first that in order to build a fundamental mind and brain theory, we need to combine 3 types of studies or data. The ones which were most ancient from the first person perspective, mind 1, the objective data from psychology, behavior and verbal reports, and objective data from neuroscience, brain data. And only when combined together, they can give an adequate fundamental theory of mind and brain. Not a single one of them will be sufficient. And what is important also is that the projections from this theory goes not only to the third person objective data, but also to the first person subjective data. Why it is so relevant? For the mind and brain science, it synthesizes the subjective experiences with third person data to build a theory. It also allows to test the statements of the theory using the subjective data, not only third person objective data, but our own observations, derived from the mind and brain theory, which gives a synthesis of what to know in neuroscience. And it allows to look at unexpected and unexplored regions. And why it is relevant for the Buddhist science, I think, because this methodology says that the theory which we need is a result of synthesis of first person and third first-person data. Therefore, its statements cannot be derived just by the contemplative studies alone. Furthermore, they might appear because of the neuroscience data, very different from the theory which is based just on contemplative studies. So there is something new appearing in the center as a main theory. The predictions of it is different. And first, the resulting theory can allow to explain in a new way many of the existing data on subjective experience, which were known for hundreds of years, but there were no explanations. And second, this theory for the Buddhist practice can allow to look in the unexpected and unexplored domains of subjective experience, which were not known, like the theory of relativity to physics before, were not known to the mind theory before. And also to develop some new types of contemplative techniques and practices, which again, the theory suggests it is possible, but they were not explored and found yet in the space of possibilities. And I think that there are a number of projects which can result from this. For example, comparing some of the basic principles in the Western first-person perspective studies of what consciousness is and Buddhist studies. If we can formulate 5 principles of what any experience, subjective experience, has in common in the Western science and philosophy and in the Buddhist science of mind, and look whether they are exactly the same or they are different, and then how it projects to the brain data, that can be one of the projects.
Sure.
behavioral science neuroscience
and in my last slides, I want to return to my first slide, but it is now animated.
Sun.
It is sun, but there is a point, which is the main point of the theory which we are using. It says that mind can be viewed as a structure and consciousness as a process in it. Now, no sun, no flashes of this. No mind, no consciousness. Because mind is a process, mind is a structure and consciousness is a process in it. There is a possibility that no consciousness, loss of consciousness, trauma, but mind is still there, and there is recovery, for example, in the patients, and he is the same person, the mind is there. And there is a number of advantages for scientific understanding and experimental studies of mind if we look at it as a structure. For example, we can ask the questions, what is the nature of this structure? How can we theoretically describe it? And we have in our theory description of what the mind is. We can ask how it is built internally. And we can ask how did this structure appear? How did it originate? By treating mind as a structure, we can start mapping this structure, understanding how it develops dynamically, because as you saw on this picture of sun, it is constantly in move. It is always changing, but it is still the same sun. And we can finally start studying processes that are very specific just to this structure, the mental processes. No this structure, no processing in it. Consciousness is a specific type of this process which we are interested in. Thank you very much for your attention.
Wonderful. 이 슈그를 가서 봐. 이면도단 이 쉐버를 가져. 네. Thank you. Wonderful.
So if your Holiness agree, then we might probably have the following mode of discussions. We came here to meet the Buddhist views. So let us give your part of the audience the main step,
That's very good.
because all of us can have numerous discussions, and we have numerous discussions at home, so why should we do it here? So if you all agree, probably let's take this mode.
Yes.
So then those who have comments or questions, you're most welcome.
Okay.
Shall I give you the microphone?
It was very wonderful that you giving example of the Einstein's how approach to the physical world. I mean, it's if I am correctly, please make correct if I am misunderstood it. Saying is there's a couple of old approach or laws. If we combine together, we will get something unexpected views, and also we can make new theories, and then some of them we can test it. We know easily whether it's true or not. Some of them we cannot approach at now, but we can expect in future, right? Is that you were saying
Yes,
of the giving an
this
example?
is what Albert Einstein was saying.
Yes,
Yeah.
and to you bring that to in the where we are approaching to understanding of better mind, and we need to first person experience, and then also we also behavior way of approaching of psychologists, and also real what things going on in the neurons, how they active together in the neuroscientist point. So if we combine together, we will get also some sort of unexpected theory, and which we can also maybe some of them easily to test it, and or in future we can just looking forward. Is there any there's some sort of your idea that some sort of that combined idea? I would like to see some of your point of view. Okay, maybe this some kind of theory we can test it.
Yes.
Okay.
So my experimental field of work is related to studies of the brain and behavior at the neuronal level. And one of the things which we use, functional systems theory, predicted in 70 years ago is that the mental elements, our thoughts or our actions, combine cooperatively, synchronously, neurons from many brain areas. And when this was proposed, it was very unpopular because there was an idea that there are reflexes which go from one brain region to another brain region to another brain region, and seems logical. So the questions was how all the elements can work synchronously, and there were no methods. And about 30 years ago, we developed, being driven by this prediction, we understood that it is necessary to find new methods to observe the neurons in the whole brain working together during behavior. And we developed one of such methods based on the molecular techniques which allows us to visualize in the brain neurons that fire together in the whole brain of the animal. And we found that it is indeed the case. They fire together. And another prediction is that if you touch some of these neurons, others from the same thought or the same action from the same functional system will respond. And it is now also being tested. We can stimulate some neurons from the whole mental organ, the whole functional systems, and we can receive the behavior, the feelings, emotions, which are typical for this. Now, these were predictions which were made about 70 years ago, and it took science 70 years and my own work about 25 years to develop these techniques, intentionally because the theory says you should look there and you should have these techniques.
I have one question. Now, when we talk about mind,
yes,
if mind has come from certain particle, then there must be beginning of mind. So do you believe just one Big Bang or several Big Bang?
What I follow as a theory tells that we are observing the mind on our earth. We do not know whether the mind, we can suggest or think that the mind exists somewhere else in the universe. But we are dealing with this one. And this mind was not present, according to the theory, before the life appeared. So for billions of years there was no mind because there were no sentient beings, no living beings. And for a long time after the first living being appeared, probably they didn't have memory, which is very important for mind, because there was no nervous system and plasticity. So it is not from the particle that mind comes, but from evolution, many stages of cumulative evolution. And it probably happens somewhere else, in other Big Bangs or in other universes within the same Big Bang. We don't know about this, but
now there is the limitless galaxies. That's fact.
yes.
So can you say consciousness of being with consciousness exists only in this world, no other galaxies?
No, we cannot say. Probably because it is limitless. And the term limitless gives a limitless possibilities. There are probably other consciousness existing, but they should have had their evolution. They wouldn't appear like our consciousness appear at the single day of creation. They need some algorithm which work for many millions of years to accumulate these structures.
For Big Bang, there should be tremendous sort of energy that is cause explosion.
Yes.
So the Big Bang's explosion still going on. So from where that energy come?
Not from mind.
That's
Not
okay.
from mind.
That's
Not-
okay.
How do you
not,
know?
Not from mind, because from
That,
what we
that's
know
purely speaking, no material. So the world, galaxies, no mind. The causes of explosion, energy, no mind.
yes,
But then we have to sort of explain why it happened. Then, so that tremendous energy which causing explosion, that also come from another material, another matter. That matter come from previous world. So no beginning. If we accept beginning of galaxies, then I think there are a lot of questions, or contradictions. So then Buddhists say, now, then the causes which eventually develop a certain sort of the particles which can can become the basis of consciousness.
yes, the basis of consciousness.
Oh.
That's true. But there was no consciousness before these particles accumulated on Earth, for example.
That's right. That's true. So why, at a certain level, I think that today's the very, very subtle level, the particle which formed rock, and the very subtle level which gradually forming brain. The particle itself, same. Then why one particle just is become rock? One particle become brain. Why?
Your Holiness, you know how my grandfather answered his quest for understanding the origin of mind. He had a theory, he developed it in the middle of the 20th century, that the origin of subjective experience of consciousness comes from emotions and a very simple organisms which had the problems to survive and to live. There was a pleasure and displeasure. There was a suffering if they were not achieving the results, and pleasure when they were achieving the results. And the integrated feeling of is it good or wrong, not analytical one from the different components, but whether this functional system is working well and the organism is happy, was the first subjective experiences. So it comes from my answer to your question. The consciousness comes from the needs of life.
Life, you see, these plants also have life.
Yes, but it doesn't have nervous system.
So,
And plants without nervous system cannot make memories, and memory is very important for our.
That's right. So some occasion in America, I asked doctors, medical doctors, when you see the father's semen and the mother's egg, they also say,
In the womb. In the womb.
womb, so they 100% correct, no damage.
Perfect.
Then say, because of the healthy semen and a healthy egg combined, is it 100% sure that's combined, then life start or not? They say no guarantee. Then we have to find what is the third cause. Semen, perfect. Egg, perfect. The organ also perfect. There's no guarantee. As soon as meeting the two things, and life will take. Conception.
Conception.
Yeah.
Conception.
The conception.
Take. That's not very sure.
Yes, but are we sure that we make 100% certain verdict that they are correct? I mean that our knowledge of whether they are correct or not is also limited. So probably the life doesn't
No.
start because
Then okay.
we
your
think.
own viewpoint also, you see, very difficult to say 100% sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So better
this
not
is the way.
investigate, not thinking, just food, sleep, that's all.
No, we investigate.
Now I think here in this country, India, the concept life after life.
Yes.
In the West, the concept of creator. So this very life created by God. Here in India, not only Buddhism, but many Hinduism and Jainism, we accept it's a life after life. And the reason, there are cases, child who remember very clearly past life.
Yes.
So therefore, you see, through centuries, some investigation or questions, how, why. In the West, the modern science come from West. So there are basic sort of background, is the creator. So no problem. This very life created by God. So if further goes, then we have to ask to God. We do not need to further investigation like that. So it is quite simple.
Your Holiness, I think I read in some of your books that you met Karl Popper. You met Karl Popper.
Yes,
So
Austrian, by the way.
No.
Yes, I know.
our theories are just hypotheses, and they may be wrong. So the theory which I held and proposed, it might be completely wrong. And one of the important things why we're looking for the Buddhist experience is that certain...
I think Buddhists, these matter, I think if we talk quantum physics,
Yes.
then you see Buddhism some relevant. Otherwise, these things, ancient Indian tradition, same.
But
So I prefer, you see, use the word ancient Indian sort of
ancient
thought.
ancient Indian tradition. So do you think that the life after life can be the subject of scientific studies? Because if it is proved by scientific studies, we will need to change many of our, if not all of our the whole picture of the world. So I think it is very important to not to remove this question out of scientific study, but focus on it, because then I will say my theories are wrong.
In America, there is already a center in New York, a scientific society, which has been investigating rebirth for many, many years, and they have recorded cases of thousands of children
Professor Chigi, 가서 그러면 Chigi 어래. 그래서 I think one book wrote by one professor. He different place. You see, he investigate about 100 case child who remember past life.
Ian Stevenson.
And I myself, you see, met two Indian girl, one from Kambur, one from Patiala. So I met both very clearly sort of mentioned about their past life. So then parent, you see, according to the child's sort of memory, memory, actually that parent, you see, went to the place And the child recognized, this is my room. And another one, Tibetan, who come from Tibet, he insists, my room is in India. So eventually reach Dharamsala, my place. And that child say, no, this is not my place. They insist south. So the parent went to South India, where Tibetan settlement. Then that child led parent to one monastery, and he identified his own room. Then he mentioned, in this box, my glass there. Then open this glass. So these are mysterious.
Mysterious. And
But still, you
is
see,
most important.
worthwhile investigate. Of course, they sort of, as a firm believer about sort of the creator, then these are nonsense. Okay. This very life created by God. So very simple. No previous life. That also, I feel very, very helpful. This very life created by God, like our Father. That Father, what kind of Father? Infinite love. So we all children of that kind of infinite, loving, kind Father, God. So that tremendous help. You see, to think yourself as a child of such a wonderful Father. So we have to follow Father's wish, more compassionate. We should be more compassionate person.
It's interesting. It's similar to what Charles Darwin wrote. He, in the end of one of his books, he writes, I am proud of being a descendant of those first animals that inhabited the planet. So he got a theological education, so he wasn't an atheist at all. And he was proud of being a descendant of those first creatures, which is very important for
But
me.
this is very emotional and poetic
But
description.
he's a scholar.
Yes, and what is important for science is first to test whether these phenomena, for example, of rebirth appear, and then to start to build a theory and predictions. For example, when these memories are coming into the body and the brain of a child, is it during embryonic development when the neurons start to form connections, or is it a bit later? Can we identify the moment, and can we see what changes as a result of this? Because we know that the memories, individual memories, they are in the physical connections in the nervous system. We can see these neurons and stimulate them and produce the memories of the animal. So we would like to know now the predictions during this phenomenon of rebirth. Let's start thinking about this seriously, when it should express itself and in which way. And probably, since it should be probably also in animals, we can start doing some also experiments in the research of this.
I think more important is to ask, where is this stored? Where is this memory placed when you live this form of life?
And
how does it go further? Where it comes from?
This is difficult because you cannot test it. But when you say that these memories are implanted, come to the brain, then it is something where you can start testing what's happening with this mind and brain when the previous memories are joining it. So it becomes the domain of scientific experiments if we prove that this is possible.
If you allow, I hate that dialectic approach, especially Marx's dialectic approach. But what I can agree with you definitely, and is that, in my opinion, it's useless to continue getting those tons of experimental data that we are continuing to get every minute. While we're sitting here, several papers in each of our domains appeared from the press. We even won't read them, to say nothing of think it over. So the idea of our first speaker that we need a theory, it's the fundamental point, because otherwise everything else is useless, absolutely useless. So we are short of time. You wanted to, there is time for a short question, and then we pass. Excuse me.
I do have a question to the analogy that you give in the sun and its ray as an analogy of consciousness and mind. So you said that the mind is kind of in a structure, and the consciousness is the process of it. So when you say the mind is structure, are you referring the mind as a physical structure, or is it just base to generate consciousness from it? If the mind is a kind of physical structure, then is it possible, in the future, machines to have mind and also generate consciousness from it? These days in the news, we do hear lots of artificial intelligence. And do you think the machines will be able to generate consciousness? And if that was the case, then do you think machines can also have emotions? Because for me, I think the emotion and mind and consciousness are very much intertwined, So yeah, that is my question. And also, I need a little bit of clarification, my understanding of dualistic materialism. For me, I think what I get from your simple explanation is that whenever we are having a kind of formations in the process, and at different stages, we do get a kind of very new property that has never existed in the past. But we cannot pinpoint what that kind of new property is. And this is the same case to the mind and physical formation. If my understanding of dualistic materialism is mistaken, then just please clarify me that.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add to his?
Yes, please.
Basically similar.
Mm-hmm.
But use the microphone, please.
Mm-hmm.
Hello.
Yeah.
Is it working? Yeah.
Yes.
So it's related to his question that in your presentation you mentioned that mind is a product of evolutionary process and basically coming into function when you have the nervous system functioning and so forth. At the same time, we are also looking for that man method, the threefold method to really find about the mind-brain relationship, which I found kind of contradictory. Because if the story of the mind is based on the nervous system, then it should be, today we should be able to trace it in the brain. Why do we need the first person experience involved in this process?
I will try to combine the answers to both questions. I didn't speak about our version of this fundamental theory, but here it is in a very simplified terms. It says that first, mind had evolutionary origin, and only very simple principles were necessary for it to start to develop. The theory says that there were just three principles. One was functional system. Functional systems is a kind of a karma. They exist in even unicellular organisms or simple multicellular organisms. They work to support life. But this is not enough. The second important thing was for the nervous system to develop, because the nervous system can connect and integrate a multicellular organism and immediately send signals so that it is working as a whole. So when the functional system started to live in the nervous system, it started to coordinate the activity of the organism towards the needs of this organism, various functional systems. And there were desires already in this sense. and there were evaluation of the feedback of whether what the organism did is wrong or good, whether it is helpful. So there were some emotions, primitive emotions. But the third important quality for the mind to arise in evolution, the theory says, was the ability in the nervous system to remember things, for the cells to memorize for the long term. Because if you do not have this cumulative experience of each individual organism, they will be all the same. There will be no experience of our own mind and our own knowledge. So the theory says that once the functional system started to live in the organism with the nervous system and with memory, it was just a matter of many millions of evolutionary time for this simple algorithm to build up the new level of structures which we call mind. Now, answering your question about the mind and physical structure, the theory says that each nervous system in the simple organism, like a worm, or in higher order organisms with the brain, is a network. It has neurons connected to each other. There are connections and elements. What the theory says that this is not enough to have mind. What is necessary is that out of these elements, by their collective activity,
right, presentation.
Next presentation.
Now we want to understand what the scheme is, to have the second presentation now before lunch, but we have not much time for that, or to have it after lunch. So, Your Holiness,
What would you
what's
like
your
to-
decision?
Also, in terms of the discussion, we have
No
plenty
lunch,
of time.
no hurry.
Later on.
Another 40 minutes.
So we will start with the second presentation, and I think our discussion with the scholars, we can
I
continue in
will
the
answer
afternoon.
later on in the afternoon. yes.
Thank you.
So, will you move here? No, we cannot. So the next, well, what?
But you need, how long?
Will you move here?
I can say all things for 5 minutes.
But no.
That's too simple.
Перейдешь туда? So our next speaker is Professor Alexandrov, who was already introduced to you, but I just want to say that he has a medical education and he is a psychophysiologist, but for many years already he is interested in cross-cultural aspects of psychophysiological approach, which is very unusual because cross-cultural psychology is a well-known field, and nothing is especially new in it. But the specificity, cultural specificity of perception, decision-making in connection with physiological problems is a new approach. Professor Alexandrov is an active person in that.
No.
And also, we will end at 11:30. And if you're not done with your presentation, we will continue in the afternoon, after lunch.
Okay,
So this way we...
Yes,
can
thank
get-
you very much.
So this way you get an
Yes.
opportunity to complete.
Yes.
But let me humbly remind that we must end sharply at 11:30.
Thank you. So floor is yours. Please start.
Your Holiness, dear hostess, dear colleagues and friends, even from the title of my presentation, it's clear that I will speak about
cultural specificity, not only so-called folk ideas, but about cultural specificity of sciences. Of course, I will speak about differences between people. And of course, we are all human beings, and we are similar, but we are very different also. And maybe one of the most important, not only scientifically, but socially important conclusion which I want to propose, that our differences, they are not bad, they are nice, they are very positive. And one of the most important for me conclusion from my presentation, from first part of my presentation, will be that the more different we are, the better. Because our difference, it's very good for economy, for cognition, for anything. And I will try to prove this my point of view and I will use revolutionary data, revolutionary experience which we have in cross-cultural neuroscience and cross-cultural psychology. And I will also say about some dangerous statements about differences in sciences in different cultures and about relation of science to culture. Why it's dangerous? Because trivial point of view that we have world science, so-called unitary science, and one science. And I will try to prove that it's so and not so, both. Yes, and I was almost 40 years ago, I was a member of Soviet delegation in Russian-USA meeting in goal-directed behavior. And this meeting was very important, not only scientifically, but it seems to me politically, because it's one of the first meeting between Russian Academy of Sciences and National Academy of USA. And because of this, we had publication after this in Science about our meeting. I will return to this publication later, but what I want to stress now that they emphasize specificity of Russian approaches. And how it's possible? How it's possible if we have unitary science, one world science, where it's so that Russian people, they have special ideas, special thinkings. Maybe it was specific selection for members of this delegation. Because of this they are different. No. There are many paradigms in science, but I want to stress this difference between reactivity and activity paradigms. And this reactivity paradigm, please remember, it's Cartesian approach. We will use this later, this term. And I want to stress that it's not just different paradigms. These are competing paradigms from my point of view in very many respects. Our delegation consists of members of both of these paradigms. And here you can see members who belong to activity paradigms, and they are very beautiful. And head of reactivity paradigm group, he is Asratyan, head of Institute of High Nervous Activity in Moscow. So they were not the same group of people. So it seems that they are different because they belong to the culture. Now, I refer you to a previous report. And to answer, to describe all this problem, I will...
우르수가 가서
저의 체리가 직규이가 좀 다당지요. 그래서 상황이 섬주이다 돼서 지구지경 연구요 말했어요. This is what.
No difference between national.
Yes, to answer, I have to answer the following questions. I try to do so that all my statements you can see on presentation, because maybe it's more easy to understand. So I will answer question, do difference between national local sciences really exist? Are they related to cultural and mental specificity of country they belong to? Does single global science exist at all?
I think it should be.
We will see.
We are seeking truth.
We will see.
Truth must be same.
I will speak about truth also later. Yes. Does Russian mentality determine a predisposition for Russian local science, if it exists, to be expressly holistic? Does the united concept of consciousness and emotion, which I will propose, represent an example of holistic approach similar in this sense to Buddhist view? So it's a question which I will try to answer during my presentation. And I will return to first position. We are very different. And if I return you to introductory words by Your Holiness, you said that for doctors, it's not important who you are, to which culture you belong, to which nation you belong. I'm sorry, but it's not so. Because it's clear now that because of different
Then I think I feel I'm quite fortunate. Those hospitals where I sort of some medical checkup,
yes.
They have that kind of.
With checkup, yes. But
so
yes.
Your case seems somewhat biased.
Yes, but I have to say that there is a very strong development in so-called individualistic medicine, and there is even such thing as positive discrimination. It means that you can use some medicine against heart disease, one medicine for Afro-American people and another for white people, and doctors has to know it, and they should select special medicine for different people. Yes. So now you can see that how our empathy depends on who we are. And this experiment shows that when you see pain in people who belong to your race, you have a very strong empathy activation. But if you see pain for people who belong to another race, you have strong less activation, significantly less activation. It's same for Chinese people and same for Caucasian people. We also check moral decision in different group of people, in Russian people and English-speaking people. What we found, we have found also as other scientists also, that Russian people and English-speaking people, they use the same implicit concept to make moral decision. Yes, we use same implicit complex. But when we compare their decision, we see that, for example, Russian people, they use much more forbidden decision. That you cannot do this. It's very important for Russian population. Forbidden. There are actions which you cannot do. And opposite thing for English-speaking people. They more often use obligatory things, that you should do this. You have to act in this way. And this is very statistically significant. Next thing, when we see development of moral decisions, it's usual, yesterday we already heard about this thing, when you should decide if this train will go straight, it will kill 5 people. but you can change its direction. If you will change this direction, it will kill one guy. You will do this or not? It's very often used, of course you know, very often used dilemma. This decision to kill one to save five, it's utilitarian decision. And you can see from this cube that during development, during lifespan, number of utilitarian decisions decreased for both group. For Russian people decreased, they became less utilitarian with age. The more we older, the less we are utilitarian, it seems. And same for English-speaking people. It means that I will explain more. Young people I will tell it in another way, that more older we are, less often we choose utilitarian decision to kill one to save five. And it's for both population, for Russian population, for English-speaking population. But look on this difference. At each age, Western people more utilitarian than Russian people. The same tendency, but on different levels.
Why you call this just killing one person, not the rest four is called utilitarian?
Sorry?
Why you are using the word utilitarian in this context? What is the meaning?
Utilitarian means that you decided to change direction of movement of train, and you decided to kill one to save five.
Why this is called utilitarian?
Because there is two ways of decision of this task. Of course, there are more, but in general, there are two. First is utilitarian, that it's easy position. It's better to save 5 people than one. And you choose, okay, I will kill one. Because you simply wait. It's counting. It's arithmetic. And you can select another decision. I cannot kill anybody. And I cannot introduce in this event and let this train go where it's go. I cannot kill, even for saving. Mm-hmm. It's another kind of decision, and it's not easy decision for people. And I say that during aging, we less and less choose utilitarian decision, and more choose non-utilitarian decision. We're not introduced in this process. And I said that we have this tendency in both population, Russian population and English-speaking population, but in English-speaking population we have more often utilitarian decision in all ages. So it's different between cultures. It's funny, but I have no time to show how it's in very young age. Then, why we are so different? We can define three main laws for Western reasoning and for non-Western reasoning. A law for first law is for Western reasoning. It's law of identity. Everything must be identical with itself. Second law, law of excluded middle. A is either B or not B. And the law of non-contradiction. A is not equal to not A. And it's very strong basis for Western thinking. And we have so-called Eastern dialectical epistemology. First, the principle of change. That suggests that reality is a dynamical process. second is the principle of contradiction, and shortly speaking, that we can accept contradiction, that it's a little bit bad, a little bit good, and it's not obligatory old, and it's not obligatory new. It may be old and new simultaneously. And last is the principle of holism. This I will not explain because it's more or less clear. According to this different epistemology, in psychological investigation, we can found two kinds of perception and cognition. For Western side, we can found analytical perception and cognition. It may be most important, it's focus on objects. And laws are deterministic and linear. And holistic perception and cognition. It's focus on field, on relation between object and its environment. And no tradition of formal logic and dialectical approach, about which we already discussed during previous lecture. And there is a very good explanation and very good data by Nisbet, from which I took this slide. How to relate this different kind of mentality, different kind of logic, with ecology, economy, social practice, and so on. And it's very interesting, but I have no time to speak about it if you will ask. But what is important is that we think differently because we live in different conditions, and we have different kind of economy. And for example, agriculture. It's, for example, data even for inside of country. Inside of this country, inside of China, people who deal with rice, with agriculture related to rice, they are more holistic than in those regions of China where they deal more with wheat. Why? Because during rice, I don't know which words to use, growing rice, you have to communicate with many people. You have more collectivistic needs. And because of this, they have mentality a little bit more Eastern than mentality of people in another Western region.
No.
It's summation of data from very good review by Kenrick et al. And some other data also here, with a little my modification. And what this data shows, that this analytical perception, analytical cognition, we can see prevalence of this analytical cognition in Euro and American countries. And we can see prevalence of holistic thinking and holistic cognition in East Asian, Asian American, and so countries.
And analyticism. So the holism.
So it means that if I will be very, very straight and simple, these Western people, they try to delete things on many pieces, study these pieces, and then connect them together and say about wholeness on the basis of analysis of pieces of different parts. I'm sorry for this simplification. But if you belong to Eastern culture, you cannot accept this because you understand that whole thing, it's not sum of properties of different pieces. And you try to go from upper level, something like that. But what I want to stress here, and it will be also important, that it's not only differences between countries. It's a difference between, for example, different part of countries, as I already said about China, but also Italy. if you will compare North and South Italy, you will find immediately that North Italy is more analytic, more Western, if you want. And South Italy will be more holistic, and they have different economy and different income, even very many different problems in their contexts. And if you will study different classes in society, you will see difference, for example, between middle class and working class. And middle class in USA will be more analytic, more Western, if you want. And working class will be, if you want, more non-Western in their thinking. By the way, we tried to see it in Russia, and we have not these differences, unfortunately. We cannot show the difference between middle and working class in Russia. Maybe we have not enough data. Maybe it's very serious difference between middle class and I'm afraid to make the strong conclusion, but we did the same conclusion. Yes. We have no, but by the way, our sociological institute, they investigate middle class in our country, and they have approximately the same decision, that our middle class is very... Yes, and I prepared such a table, which I have no time to describe, of course, two syndromes, Western and non-Western syndromes, on the basis of numerous data, including our own data. What is very important for us for next discussion, that for Western syndrome, reductionism and analyticity is characteristic, and for non-Western, holism and anti-reductionism. And what is very important, I already said about it, formal logic for Western and dialectical logic for non-Western. One very interesting example from my own life. When we applied our article about emotion and consciousness in this concept, which I will try to explain you today, we had communication with a reviewer. And this reviewer was very clever and very good reviewer. And the idea of this concept, that we cannot really divide object, or such object as consciousness and such object and emotion as separate objects. I will tell about it. And what he wrote, that it's very good. But can you apply old good formal logic for your study? Can you really say if emotion exists, so it should be something that produces emotion? Same with consciousness. So it's very difficult for this very clever reviewer with his formal logic idea to accept this non-disjunctive division. But I will tell about this later. What I want to stress here now, that we have this contradiction between different kind of thinking, even during reviewing, if you deal with theory. So the fact that history, culture, social organization, and philosophy have their specific features in different countries goes unquestioned. Nevertheless, how about science? And as I already said, trivial answer, there is only one side, world science. And even irony about this question. This article was published in 1945, and this author of this article was angry after reading of article again in Science about Soviet biology, and he wrote, how it's possible to write about Soviet biology? Then we can propose that Polynesian biology exists, and even capitalist biology. So I want to stress that this idea that we have different local sciences, it's not very easy to propose because people are angry when they hear it. But what we should also stress is that reasoning is inseparably intertwined with cultural models. And what is universal is our capacity to infer and judge. However, the judgment is based on our culturally specific concept, on our folk knowledge. And I absolutely agree with these authors that folk theories of physical causality differ between Western and Asian cultures. And this difference may lead to culturally divergent interpretation of physical phenomena. And it leads, and by the way, even people who develop quantum physics, they especially stressed that it's interesting that this quantum physics is very nice understand people in Russia and Japan, because they are dialectical and holistic thinking. And they're accepting of contradictions. And now here, our classification, you understand that for science, it's very important to classify objects. I can continue. For science, it's very important to classify many things based on classification, everything. And we have different kind of classification in our mind. And it's also experiments from cross-cultural psychology. There are 3 objects here, cow, chicken, and grass. And when you ask people, connect please 2 most closely connected pictures, and you have significantly different classification. People in Western country use taxonomic classification. They will say that cow and chicken, they're together because they are animals. But people in non-Western country, they much more significantly more often, by the way, in Russia, I checked it myself, same. They will connect cow and grass. Why? Because cow eat grass. Because for them, much more important relation between object and environment. I told about this, and it's very clear. I can continue. Now I can return to this article about Soviet delegation. And they stressed that Soviets put great emphasis on the interaction between organism and environment. Why? Because cow and grass. Because for Russian mentality, it's very important to relate object and environment. Because of this emphasis, which people from Western science see clearly. And we have different concepts because of our different cultures and our different folk science. And in the framework of 2 different concepts, the same set of data possesses as different facts. It means that on the basis of if we use different concepts, we have different set of facts in different cultures, even if we look on the same events and objects. And okay, I will omit this and show this very old statement which is more or less correct in this given sense. Let everybody speak the truth they believe. They believe in this sense according to their concept. And leave the real truth to the God. It's about truth, what I promised that I will tell about truth later. And now about science, again, we can return. The opposing opinions of 2 remarkable Russian writers and profound thinkers. And I love both of them. And one of them, Chekhov, stated, there is no such thing as national science. And another, Dostoevsky, science is always national. And what I can say about this, that science is at least partly based on folk knowledge and developed by scientists whose cognitive processes are culturally specific. So individual scientific knowledge includes considerable amounts of ordinary knowledge, and there are even investigation in this sense about this. And many authors conclude it is not natural that science, being a part of national specific culture, based at least partly on folk knowledge and developed by scientists with their culture-specific cognitive processes, and along with invariant characteristics that reflect its global nature, processing some national culture-dependent features. Again, Chekhov. Chekhov wrote to Suvorin before his trip to Sakhalin. Generally speaking, Russia is in extreme poverty when it comes to facts, but it is extremely rich with reasoning of different kinds. Do you remember our considering of abstracts from Russia? It's usually grand theories and a very few facts. And, and 88 years later, after this writing by Chekhov, it's again about our delegation. They have a fondness for grand theories into which to fit their findings. Americans, on the other hand, are more molecularly oriented, more empirical, and wary of global hypotheses. It's again cultural specificity which people see during centuries. And specifically characteristic of Russian culture, which was given from outside Russia. That is very important. It's outside view. Rebellion against Cartesian paradigm, I will remind, it's stimulus reaction approach. The foundation and symbol of the Western scientific thinking took place in Russia, of all places. So it's Russian specificity, revolution against this Cartesian paradigm. And Graham, who is a very good specialist in history of Russian and Soviet science, he stressed that anti-reductionist approach has it.
No. Quran that is.
I can continue. Graham, I told that he is a very good specialist in Russian and Soviet science. He stressed anti-reductionist approach and said that it has deep roots in the history of Russian and Soviet thinking. I want to stress, not only Soviet, but Russian and Soviet. It's cultural tradition. And new position, more or less new, of course. It's by a famous neuroscientist from England. I have opposed reductionism of Anglo-American school to much more promising tradition, especially to the established in Soviet Union. So it's again view from outside. I can make intermediate conclusion that systemicity and anti-reductionism are prominent characteristics of Russian science. And now, the problem. What does it mean? It means that we look on the same object with different concept and look from different sides. And maybe truth doesn't exist at all. But our very famous philosopher, Berdyaev, and I believe him and I agree with him completely. He states that truth cannot be national. It is always universal, but different nationalities may have mission to disclose particular sides of this truth, to see on this truth from different positions. And now I will move to my very important conclusion. For this, some introductory statements. That on the basis of many works, we can define so-called holistic and analytic stage of cognition. First stage, and I will cite Heisenberg now, that systematization of fact, producing hypothesis, you should rather feel than analyze an event. It's something like Kostya told about Einstein's view, that he used more intuition than knowledge. Even he has such wording, I need more intuition than knowledge. Such strange thing for Einstein. And for collecting facts, you should use precise, accurate experimental work. So we have two stages. And philosophical and methodological work also shows that when you use holism, and I said it another way, that to produce initial hypotheses, to formulate new ways of analysis, you should be holistic. I am afraid to forget. Please don't think that I think that it's possible to cognitize with holistic or analytic only. Of course, it's always continuum. And we only move from one side of this continuum to another. I speak about prevalence of this or that. So you should use more holistic to produce hypotheses, and more analytic view and more reductionistic to control, to get new data, to check data, and so on. And by the way, I have no time to refer on Pavlov, which Professor Anokhin also already mentioned. But Pavlov was very angry on Russian mind when he said that if I will use terms of this my report, that we are very good in first stage, but we are very bad in second stage. He specially produced this special small essay about specificity of Russian mind. But he was angry with this property. And he was angry, but it's a property of our culture, which favor such way of thinking. And now idea of complementarity. You already probably I almost finished first part of my presentation. Yes, yes, and idea of complementarity. So we have first stage of cognition, you can see it. And this stage of cognition, when you produce new ideas, new direction, and new direction of science, even new sciences. And then second stage comes when you check these ideas and when you apply it to practical reasons. And I want to stress that money belongs to second stage, not to first. And because of these people who use more analytical approaches, they, how to say, to simplify this, they have more money. And we have even some economical speculation in this sense. I have no time to speak, and even article about economical development, mentality, and administrative structure in relation to mentality in different countries, and Western and non-Western countries. So, but what is very important, and I can say even most important, that we have unite single cognitive process in science and in our individual cognition. And in this cognitive process, we have stages, holistic stages, which is absolutely necessary, as you already see, for producing new ideas, and analytic stages, which absolutely necessary, firstly, to have data, secondly, to have practical application, to build houses, to make radio, and so on. And by the way, this second analytical stage is necessary for next holistic stage, because on holistic stage, we use data from previous analytic stage. And most important thing from this most important stages, that different cultures support more in their members different kind of work. Of course, I don't want to, so I mean that non-Western countries support more first stage, and Western countries support more analytic second stage. I don't mean that there are no people with analytical thinking in Russia or in non-Western countries. Of course not. I especially stress that we have different people in each country, and we have complementarity. It means we have friendship between people with different way of thinking inside of country and between countries. And what I want to stress especially, and it's not only scientific meaning, that when we see somebody who is different, we don't be tolerant. What I mean, you don't say, of course he's different, I don't like it, but I am intelligent, and I should somehow accept him. I should educate myself to accept him. No, it's from my point of view, a much better position is the following. He is different, and if he is different, he look on the things differently, and it's complementary to my view. Because of this, he is my best friend. He needs me much more than people who are the same as me. In that sense, I mean that this difference is very important and useful for economy, for our surviving. And I think that maybe it's very important for us, for scientists, to give to political people this idea that you shouldn't say to people, prohibit them, their differences, try to accept them. No, take them because they are different. It means we need them. We need them very much because they are complementary to our thinking. And now, second part of my report, where I want to speak about problem of consciousness and emotion.
Will be after lunch.
Which will be after lunch.
Good.
Thank you. I would like to request everybody to remain seated until His Holiness has left the room. No.
Very important for our health. So now that's so one purpose, this kind of meeting, expand the field of scientific research. Now, not only external thing, but also it should include our consciousness, our emotion, our mind. This one purpose, purely academic, science. Of course, decade by decade, even I think year by year, scientific research further developing. So now should include about mind or emotion, these things. One thing. The second purpose, now look, this very moment, we enjoy peace, friendship, but at the same time, this very moment, some part of the world killing. Human being, killing by human being. Some human being killed by animal, tiger, lion, elephant, sometimes, it becomes news. Now human being killing by another human being, more or less normal. And then there is huge gap, rich and poor. Richer people, richer nation, they enjoy a lot of facility. And also they have, because of surplus somewhere, surplus. At the same time, same planet, same human being, facing starvation. Particularly those young children. Yemen, some other places, we can see often television. Young boy, young children, very thin, dying due to lack of medication and also due to lack of kasadi, protein, like that. So, and then mobilized violence, that's war. Then 20th century, you see, through war, including civil war in Russia and also China, and so on, including civil war in 20th century, some historians say over 200 million people killed through violence. If that amount of immense violence really sort of make new shape of world, and then some people say worthwhile to sacrifice millions of people's life in order to bring better world, peaceful world. But that is not the case. Now today, still in human mind, still you see thinking, whenever some problem, disagreement happen, always you think how to solve that by force. That's old thinking. We should learn now to use force. What happened? Really solve the problem? No. Violence, once you committed violence, more violence, chain reaction, like that. One example, I love President Bush, one of former US president.
In scientific research. And I myself as a neuroscientist by training, but also work in the field of neuroscience of memory, mind, and higher nervous activity. So these are the participants, and we're very thankful for inviting us to meet you for this important discussion. Yep. So if you have no questions to participants, we expected that you might give us some introduction to the way you think about this problem and what you think is important in this context.
Interest towards technology from my childhood. I have very much interest about the mechanic things, how it moves, these things. So then gradually develop interest towards science. So over 30 years, serious discussion with scientists, mainly, as I mentioned briefly yesterday also, the cosmology, neurobiology, physics, particularly quantum physics, then psychology. So then time passes. Now I feel this kind of meeting, two purpose. One purpose, simply extend our knowledge through scientific research. Previously, as far as I know, till late 20th century, the scientists mainly, you see, carry investigation about external things, including brain. But just, you see, mainly, I think a thing which can, measured, and also third person, you see, can join all like that. The consciousness very much sort of related with a subjective way, like that. But then later part, 20th century, and now beginning of 21st century, now more and more scientists, they begin to feel, there is something which affects our brain. So that's still, that very nature or sort of system still mysterious. But there is something. Through meditation, through training of mind, is the effect that kasa. That word I difficult to pronounce.
Brain plasticity.
Kesha
Brain plasticity.
So then obviously, now scientists say, many scientists say, the constant anger, fear, stress, very bad for our health. Calm mind.
Professor David Izrailevich Dubrovsky is a philosopher. He is working in Moscow at the Institute of Philosophy of the Russian Academy of Sciences. And he is an outstanding expert in the field of philosophy of consciousness. He suggested as early as in 1960s a genuinely new theory of consciousness, which relates consciousness to information in the brain. And his main interest is linking the consciousness to the brain studies. He also has hundreds of publications, several books which are classics in Russian philosophy of consciousness. Professor Victoria Lysenko, she is also at the Institute of Philosophy in Moscow, and she is an expert in the Eastern philosophy and especially in the Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist science. She is a head of the sector on these topics in the Institute of Philosophy. And recently, a year ago, she has organized a first meeting in Moscow where the Buddhist scholars and Russian philosophers and scientists met to discuss these issues of mind and consciousness. You know Dr. Andrei Terentiev, who has been long acquainted and a friend of you and translated many of your books into Russian, being an expert in Buddhism. Professor Nikolai Yankovsky is a scientific director of the Institute of General Genetics. He is a geneticist broadly, and he is interested in many areas of genetics, having a lot of fundamental work in this field, and he works also on the genetics of different populations. Professor Maria Falikman, she is at Moscow State University. She is a psychologist by training, but she works in the field which combines psychology and neuroscience. She is interested in various aspects of attention, memory, and how humans can perform these complex cognitive functions. Professor Dmitry Volkov is again a philosopher. He is also a specialist in the philosophy of consciousness. He has founded and supports the work of the Center for Consciousness Studies at Moscow State University. And he is famous in our country because he also invited many of the outstanding Western philosophers of neuroscience and consciousness to visit our country and organized a number of international meetings on the problem of philosophy of consciousness. And Professor Yuri Alexandrov, he is the head of the laboratory at the Institute of Psychology, also Russian Academy of Sciences in Moscow. And he combines expertise in neurophysiology, neuroscience, and psychology. He actually is the head of the laboratory which is called the Neural Basis of Mind. And this shows some traditions of the interest of Russian neuroscience and psychology to the problem of mind and brain.
As a human being, very nice person. I love him. I respect him. But his Iraq war, his motivation is good. Try to bring democracy, freedom in Iraq. But method wrong. Once he committed violence, then unexpected sort of side effect. Now today's world, in Arab, many Muslim world, you see the negative feeling towards America. So after that even happened, since I know President Bush very well, so one occasion, my meeting with President Bush, then I told him, I respect you, I love you, but some of your policy is concerned, I have some great reservation. And he laughed. So like that. You see, motivation, I'm quite sure, sincere, but method wrong. Use violence. So nowadays, I think, anti-American feeling in Arab world. Some of my friends in Muslim world, they're telling me like that. Since Iraq war, much sort of the effect. So therefore, now I always telling with full confidence, now 20th century becomes century of violence. Now, on the basis of our experience, which we learned from events in 20th century, now we must build this 21st century should be century of peace. In order to solve disagreement, some problem, we must use dialogue, talk. Consider them as human brothers, sisters, part of humanity. Whether we like it or not, we have to live together on this planet. With sort of scientific sort of, help of scientific sort of research and then technology, some disagreement happen, then the other party should remove to Mars or Moon. Let them remain there. We free then, no problem. That's impossible. Oh, we have to live on this planet.
Together, yeah.
Added due to global warming and global economy. National boundary, not much significant. We have to live together. Mm-hmm. So now time come. We have to educate. We have to change through education, through awareness, the concept of we and they. You see, we have to change. You see, that strong feeling, we and they. That's the basis of violence. So we should make effort, you see, to educate people. Although you see some differences there, political or economy or religiously, but still we are part of humanity. So my commitment is trying to promote sense of oneness of 7 billion human beings. Now here, they very much involved sense of love, sense of concern over others' well-being. That quite fit we human beings, social animal. And also then one important, now a few years ago, one occasion of meeting with scientists. Some scientists, they say, now actually one cartoon, there's one cartoon.
Your Holiness, if I may start. Yes. While other speakers are coming, there are still 5 minutes until the beginning. Yeah. I would like to say a few words of introduction why we were so interested in coming to this discussion, and thank you very much for your kind invitation. We feel that Russia and Russian science can be an important bridge between the Eastern tradition of thinking and science and Western science. Russia occupies a peculiar place both culturally and geographically. It is, on one side, is filled with Eastern mentality and a particular harsh environment which required cooperation of people in this environment for their survival. On the other type, it accumulated the Western influences from Western Europe and also rigorous scientific traditions which arose in Western Europe several centuries ago. And that forms a very specific amalgam, mixture of these two cultures and thinkings, which I might call Middle West because it is in between these two cultures. And if to take it as a clue, it can actually serve a very useful role because of several centuries of these contacts between these different cultures and approaches, both contemplative and experimental scientific approaches. People in Russia might have a better readiness and understanding to bridge these two cultures, and especially in the fields of deep questions of humanity, which are not solved yet by the Western science. So that was our initial motive to come on your kind invitation and to participate in this discussion with the topic of the nature of consciousness as one of the most important for the humanity, both in understanding ourselves and in relieving many sufferings in the world. And also because of the deep interest of the Russian science for nearly 2 centuries in this question. So people here are coming from different disciplines and different traditions, different scientific schools. For example, Professor Tatiana Chernigovskaya, she is a professor of the St. Petersburg University, formerly Leningrad University. And she is a specialist in cognitive science, especially in the problem of brain and language, and also language and mind, language and consciousness. She has numerous research publications in these fields, and she is also very well known in Russia for promoting understanding of science of brain and mind to general public.